They say there's a fine line between madness and genius, and if that's true, then I think Vince McMahon crossed that line years ago. Here's what happens when an absolute lunatic has access to his own television show every week. Absolute proof that the madness of Vinnie Mac started back in the 80s. This now legendary clip is from the 1987 Slammy Awards. In fact, it was the 37th annual Slammy Awards, which is another sign of early onset madness on Vince's behalf, as it was in fact the second annual awards ceremony. This absolutely jaw-dropping performance from Vince sees him unleashing the daddest of dad dance moves, all in aid of promoting Pile Driver, the wrestling album 2. We can never go back to the 1980s, and sometimes I think that's for the best. This one isn't strictly Vince's fault, but it's definitely in the "that could only happen to Vince McMahon" column. The Royal Rumble 2005 would play host to one of wrestling's most infamous botches. John Cena and Batista were the final two in the Royal Rumble match, and both men fell out of the ring at the same time. The wrestling world held its breath in anticipation. Who would receive their one-way ticket to the main event of WrestleMania? Luckily, the granddaddy of WWE was there to save the day for the granddaddy of them all as he marched down to the ring. Unfortunately, he managed to somehow tear both of his quads simply by getting into the ring. The injury was so bad, Vince couldn't even stand up. Eventually, he called for the match to be restarted before he was helped to the backstage area. Batista won the Royal Rumble, by the way. One of mad old Vince's pastimes was winding up good old JR at every available opportunity because, haha, fat man in cowboy hat has melty face. JR had to take time off TV in 2005 in order to get fairly serious colon surgery. And of course, Vince McMahon certainly wanted to make fun of that on his television show. Vince decided to take the time to set up an entire 7-minute skit on an episode of Raw in which Vince dressed as a doctor and was accompanied by a nurse, in inverted commas, as they pulled various items out of JR's ass. Vince made JR's wife cry, by the way, after she saw the skit on TV, and unsurprisingly JR was very unhappy and felt completely disrespected by the entire thing. In 2007, Vince and co decided to descend into the realms of soap opera on Raw. Depressed and unhappy after a turbulent time feuding with Donald Trump of all people, Vince decided to host an appreciation night for himself. The only trouble was, nobody was on board with it backstage. Vince solemnly slinked off to his limo in a deep depression for an early night, and as he shut the door, the car blew up in a fireball. The news was all over WWE.com, with some gullible fans actually believing it was real. WWE put out a press release stating that McMahon was presumed dead, and we'd have to tune into Raw the next week for more information. That dastardly real-life murderer Chris Benoit went on his killing spree shortly thereafter, and WWE had no choice but to drop the storyline, never mentioning it again. In 2005, Vince and Shawn Michaels went head-to-head, leading to a series of matches, including a no-holds-barred match at WrestleMania 22. Not exactly one of Mr. WrestleMania's finest half-hours on the grandest stage of them all. Vince and Shane had been conspiring to eliminate Shawn from the 2006 Royal Rumble, and they made him enter the Kiss My Ass Club, and even made the born-again Christian take a drugs test. Looking to get into Shawn's head, Vince started questioning his faith, with Vince naturally comparing himself to God. While actual God created Adam and Eve, Vince said that he created Hulkamania and Austin 3:16. Vince also reminded everyone that he, unlike God, didn't take Sundays off. At Backlash, Vince actually booked himself and Shane against Shawn and, yes, you guessed it, God. God was represented by a spotlight on the way to the ring. Wrestling is incredibly highbrow entertainment, isn't it? And I won't hear anyone say otherwise. It was 2001 and sexual misconduct in the workplace still hadn't been invented. Luckily for Vince, Trish Stratus was forced to bark like a dog as she begged for forgiveness from Vince for looking at him wrong or something. Vince literally made Trish crawl around the ring like a dog and speak in dog language as Paul Heyman lost his shit on commentary. It felt like a bad thing at the time, and now with 21 years of hindsight, it definitely isn't comfortable to watch. Poor Trish deserved better. It was an outlandish and satirical skit involving fictional characters similar to that of many scripted television shows and movies, said WWE. That was the lame response WWE gave years later when they were questioned about Vince dropping the N-bomb at the Survivor Series 2005. Booker T and Sharmell were present as Vince uttered the slur at John Cena in one of those moments that he should be genuinely ashamed of. I'm not defending him here, but Vince is obviously just utterly out of touch. But then again, this is the same man who authorised racism as part of Booker T's 2003 WrestleMania storyline with Triple H. Mr. McMahon's Kiss My Ass Club is one of those post-Attitude Era things that happened that I can't quite believe when I'm looking back on it. It's hard to believe that this, or the Heidenreich thing, or the Gene Snitsky thing, or the Kerwin White thing actually happened. For those that ended up on the wrong side of Vince in the early 2000s, they could expect to be humiliated on live TV in front of paying fans by having to literally kiss his ass. The club is a veritable who's who of superstars including JR, Shawn Michaels, Shane McMahon, Mick Foley and Hornswoggle, and of course JR had to join the club in his hometown of Oklahoma. Good old Vince McMahon Jr. He really is a one-of-a-kind boss, isn't he?